ChatGPT said. It started when I got a ticket for driving on my own road. Not a speeding ticket, not a parking ticket. No, the citation simply said, unauthorized access through HOA jurisdiction. Which was fascinating, considering I live on a 300-acre ranch in rural Texas with exactly one way in or out, a rickety wooden bridge I built myself a decade ago over a dry creek bed that only floods once every 3 years. The road from the bridge runs for half a mile across my property before it even touches public land. And somewhere in that half mile, the HOA apparently decided to plant a flag and claim sovereignty like it was the annexation of Crimea. The citation was delivered by a pudgy, red-faced man in an ill-fitting blazer who introduced himself as Deputy Compliance Officer of the Whispering Cedars HOA. He had parked his golf cart, yes, golf cart, right in front of my cattle gate and was holding a clipboard like it was a weapon of divine justice. "Sir," he said with the kind of nasal authority only middle management can achieve, "you are in violation of HOA Code 17B for non-resident vehicular access." I blinked, then laughed, then stopped laughing when I realized he wasn't joking. I explained that I wasn't a resident, I wasn't in Whispering Cedars, and I wasn't driving through, it was literally my land. My driveway. My road. "We've redrawn the property lines to include the bridge access," he said smugly, like it was a casual thing to just redraw reality. That was the moment I knew I was dealing with a whole new breed of lunatic. Whispering Cedars is a nightmare development of oversized McMansions with plastic shutters and fake stone siding, built just uphill from my property line. When the developer went bankrupt mid-project, the HOA took over and started expanding like a mold. They'd already annexed the old hiking trail through the woods, the fishing dock by the public lake, and even tried to claim a gravel fire road as a private scenic drive. But my ranch? My bridge? That was new. The next day I got an envelope taped to my mailbox with HOA letterhead and about 40 pages of maps, bylaws, and citations. Apparently, during a recent vote, which I had not been invited to, being a non-resident, the board had voted to incorporate the bridge and access road into the Whispering Cedars jurisdiction for aesthetic and safety reasons. What safety reasons? I asked myself as I flipped through the nonsense. It included such gems as dust pollution, vehicular disruption, and my personal favorite, the risk of livestock escape during school bus routes. There is no school bus. There are no kids. There are no schools for 15 miles. But sure, I guess my cows are a public menace now. I decided to do what any sane person would do, ignore it. That lasted less than 2 days. I returned from a supply run to find a laminated sign nailed to the post on my side of the bridge. It read, "Private road. HOA members only. Violators will be fined and towed." They had also placed an orange traffic cone in the middle of the bridge, like that was going to stop anyone. My ranch hand Trevor called me saying some lady had stopped him mid-delivery and demanded he show his bridge pass. I told him to drive right past her and throw the cone in the creek. Naturally, that didn't go over well. The next morning, I had HOA President Charlene Rusk herself waiting at the bridge. She stood there like a blonde gargoyle in capri pants and a rhinestone visor, arms crossed, iPad in hand. "You're trespassing," she snapped before I could even get out of my truck. I rolled down the window and smiled. "You're standing on my bridge," I replied. She started quoting ordinance numbers again, demanding my compliance and threatening legal action. "Ma'am," I said slowly, "this bridge is entirely on my land. This road is my land. You're trespassing." She smirked. "Not anymore." We passed a motion. Like it was a game of Monopoly. She followed me onto my property, snapping photos of my truck like she was gathering evidence for an FBI raid. I asked her what she thought she was doing, and she told me they were now documenting traffic patterns for future citations. I told her if she didn't leave in the next 5 minutes, I'd document her face being escorted off my land by the sheriff. She left. But the next day they doubled down. The bridge had been blockaded. They installed a plastic chain with a padlock across the beams and a folding gate like the kind used in elementary school parking lot. A shiny new sign said, HOA Controlled Access Zone, violators will be prosecuted. I called the sheriff. The sheriff laughed. That's not even close to legal, he said. You want me to come out there and cut the chain? I told him no. I had a better idea. You see, they made one fatal mistake. They thought they owned the bridge. But I actually owned the bridge. And not just the bridge. I owned the land surrounding the creek, the airspace above it, and the only legal easement connecting their little neighborhood to the state road. Because when the developers built Whispering Cedars, they didn't want to pay to install a new road over the hill. So they got a temporary construction easement across my land, which expired 10 years ago. And no one ever filed for a new one. I pulled the deed records from the county clerk, triple-checked the topographical maps, and smiled. Then I made a call to a welder friend of mine. We installed a 12-foot-tall steel gate at the ranch side of the bridge with a locking mechanism strong enough to hold back a dump truck. I painted it fire engine red and stenciled one sentence across the top. Private property. No HOA access. Then I went one step further. I got a second gate installed on the other side of the bridge. Yes, on their side. See, I own 5 feet into their tree line past the bridge terminus, which no one ever checked because it was covered in overgrowth. They thought it was theirs. It wasn't. We cleared it, drove in concrete posts, and welded a matching gate directly into the slope. It sealed off the only exit in or out of Whispering Cedars unless they wanted to hike 3 miles through barbed wire and thorns. By Sunday morning, Charlene and her board members were losing their mind. 30 families trapped behind a locked bridge, HOA board pacing with clipboards, residents screaming about groceries and missed church. And I was sipping coffee from a thermos on my porch, binoculars in hand, watching chaos unfold from a lawn chair like it was my own private reality show. They called the county. They called the sheriff. They even called the fire department. No one helped. The county confirmed the road had no public designation and had reverted to private status after the original easement expired. The sheriff reminded them that I hadn't broken a single law. And the fire chief said if they wanted access, they'd need to file an emergency servitude petition, and those take weeks. So Charlene tried one last move. She brought a lawyer. He knocked on my gate, my real one, up by the main ranch house, and handed me a cease and desist letter, claiming I had unlawfully restricted access to a public right-of-way. I smiled, thanked him, and handed him my own envelope in return, complete with plat maps, title records, and a formal notice revoking all unregistered easements effective immediately. He looked at it, looked at me, and said, "They're gonna hate this." I said, "Good. I hope they hate it a lot." When the sun came up the next day, the sounds of honking horns, raised voices, and cell phone ringtones drifted across the dry creek bed like a symphony of entitlement. From my front porch, I could see the residents of Whispering Cedars gathered in a confused, furious mob on their side of the bridge, pacing, waving arms, and making what I could only assume were increasingly unhinged phone calls. Some stood in robes and slippers, others in yoga gear or buttoned-up polos. One man in a fishing vest actually tried to climb around the gate through the creek bed and slipped, landing in 6 inches of mud and shame. I gave him a polite wave through the binoculars. He flipped me off, which I logged as a victory. The HOA board had set up a makeshift command center on a folding table just behind the locked gate, complete with laptops, walkie-talkies, and a Keurig plugged into a gas-powered generator. Charlene stood in front like she was running a FEMA operation, barking into a Bluetooth earpiece and pacing with the furious precision of someone who had lost complete control and was now trying to scream it back into existence. At one point, she even waved a piece of paper at my camera. Yes, I'd mounted a trail cam with a zoom lens on a tree overlooking the bridge. It was glorious. That afternoon, I got a formal visit from 2 sheriff's deputies. I welcomed them with lemonade. They were polite, professional, and mostly curious about what the hell was going on. I handed them the paperwork, my deeds, survey maps, documentation showing the expired easement and lack of public right-of-way, and they flipped through it like they'd seen this kind of thing a dozen times before. One of them asked, "So you built both gates?" I nodded. "And you're blocking access entirely?" I nodded again. "You realize they're gonna explode, right?" I just smiled. "They already are." The deputies gave me a look of grudging admiration, then told me they'd make a note that it was a civil matter and not a criminal one. As long as I wasn't damaging property or endangering lives, they had no reason to interfere. I wished them a good day, and even offered to send them some beef jerky from my smoker. They declined, but they left chuckling. The next move from Charlene's camp was pure HOA theater. She had a guy, mid-30s, Bluetooth headset, designer jeans, and the smug aura of someone whose father definitely paid for his first 4 jobs, walk over to the gate with a large neon orange sign. He zip-tied it to the bars. "Notice: this gate is illegal. HOA law supersedes private obstruction." I could almost hear the dramatic voiceover in her head. I watched him take a selfie with the sign, then strut away like he'd personally liberated France. But the real cherry on top came that evening, when they tried to drone-drop documents onto my property. A little quadcopter came buzzing over the bridge, dipped low over the gate, and dropped a rolled-up manila envelope tied with twine. It landed about 20 feet from my porch. I walked over, picked it up, unrolled it, and read the first line. Emergency HOA Resolution 44A, Reinstatement of Emergency Access Rights. I laughed so hard I choked on my iced tea. Then I fed the whole thing into my fire pit and went back to grilling burgers. Over the next few days, their desperation shifted into chaos. People tried negotiating. One couple offered me $500 in cash if I'd let them just drive through once. Another guy tried guilt. "My daughter has a dance recital, man. You wouldn't block a child from art, would you?" I offered to call her an Uber from the county road, if he walked. Charlene called daily, leaving voicemails filled with legal threats, moral condemnation, and once, a passive-aggressive Bible verse. I didn't return a single one. The drama peaked when a group of 6 residents tried to take back the bridge at midnight. I heard them before I saw them, muffled grunting, the clink of tools, and the unmistakable sound of a man stepping on a rake. I turned on the floodlights and caught the entire scene. 2 guys with bolt cutters, a woman holding a lantern like she was in a Scooby-Doo episode, and Charlene in a trench coat crouched behind a bush. I activated the pre-recorded speaker attached to the post. "Trespassers will be prosecuted. This bridge is under video surveillance." They scattered like raccoons in a trash can. The next day, I finally received a formal letter, not from the HOA, but from a real lawyer. It was polite, carefully worded, and written on actual legal stationery. They were threatening a lawsuit for intentional restriction of essential ingress and egress for residents of a landlocked community. I smiled. That was the magic word I'd been waiting for: landlocked. See, in Texas, a landlocked neighborhood can request a court-granted easement, but only if they prove it's the only viable access point. Unfortunately for Whispering Cedars, their original plans included a second road on the other side of the hill. The reason it hadn't been built? The HOA didn't want to pay for the excavation. It was cheaper to keep using my bridge. That cost-cutting decision just bit them in the rear. I sent a response through my own attorney, who was more than a little gleeful about the entire thing. He included a counterclaim for trespassing, unlawful signage placement, and attempted interference with private infrastructure. The letter concluded with a generous offer. If they agreed to purchase the bridge and access road for a fair market value, we'd consider a sale. But fair market value, in this case, included permanent easement rights, annual maintenance fees, and a clause that stated no HOA regulations would ever be enforceable on my land. Total price? $2 million. Take it or leave it. Charlene left me a voicemail that night I still play sometimes when I need a pick-me-up. It started with heavy breathing, transitioned into a screech about blackmail, then dissolved into actual sobbing. "You can't do this," she cried. "We're a community." She hung up with a sound I can only describe as a gasping goat. As the legal battle loomed, residents began to fracture. Some started blaming the board. Others started questioning the original bridge usage. A few bold ones even came to my gate to apologize and ask if there was a way to privately negotiate terms. One guy offered to mow my pasture for 6 months. Another asked if I liked whiskey. It was getting pathetic. And then came the ultimate plot twist. A realtor approached me, someone from the city who represented a hedge fund sniffing around Whispering Cedars. Apparently, with the road shut down and the community trapped, property values were tanking fast. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to sell the bridge, not to the HOA but to them. They'd then sue the HOA themselves and use the access to build an entirely separate entrance to a new development nearby. I told him I'd think about it. Then I upped the price to $3 million. Why? Because at that point it was about principle. And I was just getting started. By the start of the 3rd week, Whispering Cedars was unraveling like a cheap sweater caught on barbed wire. The residents, once a unified front of identical SUVs and identically smug attitudes, had split into factions. One group stood staunchly behind Charlene and the HOA, insisting they would sue their way back to bridge access and restore order. Another group wanted a compromise, mostly because they were running low on groceries and patience. And then there was the third group, my personal favorite. These were the ones who began seriously asking, why the hell did we give a bunch of lawn sign dictators the power to trap us in our own homes? I watched it all unfold from a comfortable distance, sitting beneath my porch awning with a bucket of popcorn I absolutely did not need but was thoroughly enjoying. Through the zoom lens of my mounted trail cam, I caught several delicious moments. A shouting match between Charlene and a furious resident in a bathrobe over HOA dues being spent on generators instead of fixing the actual problem. A group of teenagers dragging coolers across the creek bed trying to smuggle in fast food. And a hilarious standoff between 2 board members accusing each other of forging votes during the infamous bridge annexation motion. Then came the media. I didn't call them. I'm not that petty. But someone did. And when a local news crew showed up in a bright blue van with Action 8 Investigates emblazoned across the side, I just about choked on my lemonade. They weren't allowed past the gate, of course. But they stood right outside it, filming interviews with trapped residents, angry families, and Charlene, who suddenly became very interested in spinning the narrative. She wore a flowing floral blouse, put on extra lip gloss, and positioned herself in front of a potted ficus like it was a press backdrop. "This man," she told the reporter, gesturing vaguely toward my property, "is holding an entire community hostage." The reporter, a wiry woman with sharp cheekbones and a sharper tongue, nodded thoughtfully and asked, "Did you actually file the proper legal paperwork to annex the bridge?" Charlene stammered. The interview pivoted fast. Soon she was sweating under the boom mic, and the residents behind her were shouting things like, "I didn't vote for this," and "My kids are missing school." Meanwhile, the reporter added a closing line that made me snort laugh. Residents of Whispering Cedars are discovering the limits of HOA power and the unexpected consequences of voting without reading the fine print. A few hours later, the story was online. By that evening, it had gone viral. Comments poured in. Memes were made. My favorite one had a photo of the locked red gate with the caption, "You shall not pass, property owner edition." I was being hailed in some corners of the internet as a folk hero. Bridge Dad, they called me. Someone even drew fan art of me in a cowboy hat riding a bull across the bridge, while HOA Karens scattered like pigeons. Naturally, this level of attention had consequences. Charlene panicked and started spinning harder than a politician during election week. She called an emergency HOA meeting, held right there by the bridge in a semicircle of lawn chairs, and livestreamed it on Facebook. I tuned in. Of course I did. The comments section was brutal. Every time she tried to justify the annexation, commenters flooded the chat with crying emojis, goat memes, and reminders that private property still exists. In the meeting, she introduced a revised resolution to file for retroactive access rights through eminent domain. That was when I paused the stream and called my lawyer. He actually laughed out loud. Eminent domain? That's for the government, not HOAs. They're not a municipality. I asked what would happen if they tried anyway. Oh, I hope they do, he said. That'll be the most expensive failure of their lives. Meanwhile, the hedge fund reps returned with a new proposal. They offered to lease the bridge instead of buying it outright. I'd retain ownership, but they'd pay me $25,000 per month for guaranteed access while they developed their adjacent parcel, and more importantly, they'd build a brand new exit road on the HOA's side of the hill. One that would connect to the state highway and completely bypass my property. You're going to make them irrelevant, I said. The guy smiled. That's the idea. I signed the lease. Within 48 hours, they had surveyors out with tripods and measuring gear, flagging the hillside. That same day, I delivered the news to the HOA in a typed letter pinned to both gates. I even included a map. It showed their new future access point, and a bright red X over the bridge with the words "no longer required." The note was signed, "With kind regards, the man you should never have messed with." The fallout was immediate. Charlene called an emergency vote to challenge the lease in court. It failed. 2 of the board members resigned mid-meeting. Someone threw a folding chair. And from the trail cam footage, I could see one guy in khakis literally fist pump when he read the notice and realized the nightmare was almost over. But I wasn't done yet. One last petty victory remained. I bought a small plot of land, just 2 acres, on the far side of their soon-to-be new access road. It was worthless scrubland, rocky and dry, but crucially, it was directly adjacent to their future gate. Then I filed the paperwork to open a roadside barbecue stand. Bridge Dad's Brisket and Revenge. The logo? A cartoon of me grilling steaks while a Karen screams in the background. I didn't actually intend to run a food business, but the permits were real. The smoker was delivered. The sign was installed. And the next time the HOA tried to sell prospective buyers on the peaceful exclusivity of whispering cedars, they'd have to do it next to the smell of mesquite smoke and slow-cooked irony. By the time construction on the new road began, the HOA's influence had shriveled into a punchline. Residents barely showed up to meetings anymore. Charlene's name had become synonymous with failure. And as for me, I used the bridge lease money to install solar panels, buy 2 more cows, and take a vacation to Montana. I left a trusted friend in charge of the gate and gave him very clear instructions. Don't let a single Range Rover cross that bridge. Not one. That fall, I received a certified letter from Charlene marked, "Urgent." I opened it by the fire with a cup of black coffee. Inside was a typed apology, well, half apology. She still claimed her actions were in good faith, but she was stepping down as HOA president. She said the community had turned against her, and she'd decided to move. "We will be selling our home," she concluded. "I trust that we'll have no issue accessing the property for real estate showings." I took out a pen, wrote 1 sentence across the page, and mailed it back. Use the new road. By early winter, Whispering Cedars was no longer a simmering HOA pressure cooker. It had burst entirely. The bridge I'd once crossed quietly every day to feed cattle or grab parts from town now stood like a sealed relic of a bygone regime. No more HOA patrols. No more golf carts. No more Charlene. The trail cam footage now showed little more than kids riding scooters and the occasional raccoon sniffing around my old mailbox post. The once militant private jurisdiction signs had all been torn down by residents who finally realized they were the ones being held hostage, not me. And yet, despite the collapse of their little fiefdom, the story wasn't quite finished. It started when the new access road was halfway done. I was walking the fence line with Trevor when we noticed 3 survey flags had disappeared near the northwest corner. We figured it was kids or wind at first, until we found a 4th one, snapped in half, and a set of tire tracks leading back toward Whispering Cedars. Someone wasn't thrilled about their new freedom. At first, I thought maybe it was just one bitter neighbor trying to cause delays. But over the next few days, more things started happening. Flag tape went missing. A pile of gravel was sabotaged with nails. One of the construction crew's water tanks was emptied overnight. Then came the kicker. A box of roofing nails was scattered across the area where they'd started pouring fresh asphalt. I met the project foreman, a tough guy named Ron who looked like he ate concrete for breakfast, and asked if he was okay continuing. He shrugged and said, "Been through worse. But someone's trying real hard to make this a problem." He installed floodlights and cameras. And I called my lawyer again, who advised documenting everything and notifying the county. Legally, we were solid, but it was clear someone had gone rogue. And I had a pretty good idea who. A few days later, while driving my ATV along the creek edge, I spotted something glinting behind a thicket. I got off and pushed through the brush until I reached a crude little lean-to, hidden in the trees just beyond the HOA's back fence. Inside it was a lawn chair, an empty bottle of peach schnapps, and, most telling, a Whispering Cedars board badge dangling from a rusted nail. The name tag was still attached. Gerald Hayes. Charlene's number 2. A man who once tried to ticket my cattle for excessive mooing during a virtual HOA meeting. I had a new target. Gerald had been quiet during the fallout. While Charlene was melting down in public, Gerald had retreated entirely. Word was he'd been removed from the board in a 17-3 vote after suggesting the HOA take out a loan to buy the bridge from me, which, of course, would have required actually admitting I owned it. Apparently, he didn't take that rejection well. And now he was living out some weird HOA revenge fantasy in the woods like a discount Rambo with a clipboard. Instead of confronting him directly, I decided to take the high ground, both strategically and creatively. I printed out stills from the trail cam showing Gerald snooping near the construction site. Then I mailed them, anonymously, to every single household in Whispering Cedars. On the back of each one I wrote, "Your HOA dues at work." The results were instantaneous. Residents stormed the HOA's Facebook page demanding answers. A video surfaced of Gerald yelling at a contractor and threatening to call Federal Construction Oversight. "That's not a real agency." Another clip caught him dragging orange cones into the road and trying to redirect traffic, only to be chased off by a bulldozer. Gerald, now fully unhinged, made the mistake of trying to retaliate in person. One evening, around sunset, I heard the unmistakable sound of tires on gravel. I stepped outside to see his silver Audi pulled up near the lower pasture gate, just short of the bridge. He got out, still wearing his old HOA badge, and shouted up the hill toward my porch, "You think you've won, but you haven't. You're poisoning this community." I leaned against the post, sipping hot cider, and replied, "You were the poison, Gerald. I'm just the antidote." He called me a land thief. I told him to go home and read a dictionary. He tried to rattle the gate, then kicked it and shouted something about sovereign community rights. I called the sheriff. By the time deputies arrived, Gerald was gone, but his car was still idling with the keys in it. Turns out he'd tried to climb down through the creek, lost his footing, and wrenched his ankle. They found him limping through blackberry bushes muttering about bylaws. He was issued a trespass citation and warned not to return. The final nail came during the HOA's annual board election. With Charlene gone and Gerald disgraced, the remaining members tried desperately to salvage credibility. But the residents had had enough. A coalition of newer, younger homeowners took over and immediately began dismantling the entire enforcement structure. Fines were erased. Gate policies were tossed. Someone even proposed converting the HOA office into a dog park. I sent a fruit basket to the new board with a note, Welcome to the neighborhood. Meanwhile, Bridge Dad's Brisket and Revenge actually opened for a weekend just to celebrate. I smoked a few racks of ribs, invited the construction crew, and served lunch to curious passers-by and a few brave Whispering Cedars residents who wanted to extend an olive branch, preferably dipped in barbecue sauce. One guy even brought me a bottle of single malt with a handwritten apology for ever voting for the annexation. I accepted graciously, and poured him a double. As the new road neared completion, I made one final addition to the now unused bridge. I installed a small plaque on the locked gate, polished brass, with only one sentence engraved on it: "Respect is earned, not voted." The plaque didn't serve a legal purpose. It wasn't flashy, but it said everything I needed to say. It marked the place where they tried to take what wasn't theirs, and where I reminded them, with full legal force, exactly what ownership means. One rainy afternoon, I got a visit from a woman named Ellen, one of the newer residents in Whispering Cedars. She parked at the lower gate and walked up the muddy trail in boots, umbrella in hand, and introduced herself as the new HOA secretary. She handed me an envelope, dry and perfectly sealed despite the storm. Inside was a formal notice. The HOA was officially relinquishing any claims to the bridge, road, and surrounding property. She said they were changing their charter to prevent future overreach, and she wanted to deliver it personally. I thanked her and walked her back to the gate. As she turned to leave, she paused and said, "Honestly? I think most of us were just scared. Charlene made everything sound so urgent. Like if we didn't control everything, we'd lose control of everything." I nodded slowly. That's how petty power works. But freedom's louder in the end. We shook hands and parted ways, the sound of the rain tapping gently on the roof of the gate. Behind us, Whispering Cedars lay quiet, finally learning what it meant to coexist with the land, and not try to own what was never theirs. Spring arrived like a slow apology, with wildflowers blooming along the dry creek and birds nesting in the eaves of the barn. The bridge still stood, tall, locked, and undisturbed, but now it was more monument than battleground. The gates on both ends remained sealed, but the tension that once pulsed beneath them had dissolved into something simpler: peace. Or at least a stubborn version of it that I was willing to accept. Whispering Cedars, once the HOA capital of overreach and delusion, had become almost tolerable. The new road was fully paved now, winding up and over the ridge with fresh white lines and a solar-powered entry gate that wasn't operated by tyrants and visors but by a basic keypad system. The residents had adjusted quickly to their freedom. Without Charlene and Gerald meddling in every backyard and barbecue, some of them even started acting like real neighbors. A few waved when they drove by the upper fence line. One guy with a Great Dane started jogging past my pasture every morning and gave me a nod like we were both part of some silent survivors club. And honestly, that was fine with me. As for Charlene, word had it she sold her house to a young couple who had no interest in HOA politics. According to my sources, which included a very chatty UPS driver and one rogue teen with a drone, she moved to Florida to start fresh in a gated community with stricter oversight. I sincerely wished her HOA board the best of luck. Maybe they'd invent a law against smiling. Gerald, meanwhile, had taken his paranoia to new heights. Apparently, he started a blog about land rights tyranny and posted a 10-part video series called The Siege of Whispering Cedars, in which he claimed I was a rogue agent sent to dismantle suburban civilization. My favorite part was when he tried to explain easement law with a toy model of my bridge made out of popsicle sticks and hot glue. The comments section roasted him into digital ash. But I didn't report it. Let him scream into the void. He'd already lost the war. I kept the trail cams running, of course. Not out of paranoia, okay, maybe a little, but mostly because the footage had become sort of a daily entertainment ritual. Instead of HOA shenanigans, now I caught deer wandering the road, a curious bobcat poking around the far end of the bridge, and one awkward proposal attempt from a couple who thought the overlook by my pasture was super rustic. She said yes, even though his knee sank into mud mid-question. I thought about charging a location fee but figured that'd be a Charlene move. Financially, the bridge lease had changed everything. I reinvested some of it into expanding the cattle operation, bought a few more solar arrays, and finally built the smokehouse I'd been dreaming about for years. I didn't name it after the bridge fiasco, that would have been too easy, but I did hang a small metal sign near the pit that said, "Cook slow. Think slower. Strike fast." People liked it. Even some of the Whispering Cedars folks started showing up at the farm stand I'd quietly opened on weekends. They came for ribs, stayed for the lemonade, and left with jars of local honey and polite conversation. Not once did I hear the words violation or bylaw. That alone made it all worth it. One Saturday, as I was packing up for the day, a kid wandered up to the table holding a battered binder with a broken plastic spine. He looked about 12, wearing a hoodie 3 sizes too big and sneakers so caked in mud I could barely see the laces. He asked if I was the bridge guy. I said maybe. He opened the binder to reveal printed photos, still frames from the viral videos, news clippings, even one of the memes with the wizard caption. "We're doing a project on local history," he said. "My teacher says this was the Battle of the HOA. Can you sign this?" I signed it, and I laughed the entire time, because nothing, and I mean nothing, feels more absurdly satisfying than knowing a 7th grade history project now included my personal revenge saga against a suburban dictatorship. Before he left, the kid looked up and said, "They said you didn't even yell. You just outsmarted everyone." I smiled. "That's the trick, kid. Always stay calm. Crazy people hate that." Later that week, I got a formal letter from the new Whispering Cedars board. It wasn't a complaint or a threat or an invoice. It was an invitation. They were holding a spring festival, no longer called Whisperfest, thank God, but just the Hill Gathering. It would be open to anyone in the area, ranchers included. They were even raffling off a fence repair kit as a joke prize. I'll admit that part made me chuckle. I didn't RSVP. I didn't attend. But I did send a thank you basket, smoked cheeses, honey, and a polite note that said, "Glad to see you folks finding your way." That was enough. The story didn't need one final explosion. It didn't need a courtroom showdown or another viral meltdown. Because the real win wasn't in shutting the bridge or posting plaques or sealing easements. It was in the slow shift that happened after. When people realized that authority without consent is just noise. When neighbors stopped looking for someone to control and started figuring out how to coexist. When my inbox stopped filling with threats and started filling with questions about when the next brisket batch would be ready. That spring, I took a long walk across the locked bridge for the first time in months. I'd left it untouched since sealing the gates, but now I carried a wrench and a bucket of oil. The hinges had rusted a little. I didn't open the gates. I had no reason to, but I gave them a fresh coat of maintenance, cleared off some wind-blown debris, and stood in the center, looking out over the creek that had once been the battlefield line of HOA absurdity. The air was crisp. The water was low. A hawk circled overhead. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not even a little. They came after me. They lied. They schemed. They tried to control something they didn't understand. But they never got what they wanted. And more importantly, they never changed who I was. I stayed calm. I stayed smart. I stayed standing. That bridge, in the end, wasn't about control. It was about boundaries. Knowing where yours end, and where someone else's begin. And making damn sure no one mistakes your generosity for surrender. So I walked back across, locked the gate again, and left the sign right where it belonged. Private property. No HOA access. Just a reminder. Not for them. For me.